This is RadPod, a podcast produced by ASMIRT, the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy. ASMIRT acknowledges the Bunurong people as the traditional owners of the land from which we record this podcast and pays respect to elders past and present. Hi, I'm Steve Lacey and I'm the Director of Education for ASMIRT. Now, there are those of us who are old enough to remember back to those days of imaging using film, the dark room antics, and CTs that took half an hour to scan. And then there are those who are a lot younger and have only heard the myths and legends of imaging in the dark ages from their more experienced counterparts. Many of us have had to adapt as technology has rapidly expanded, but what was it really like to work during those times? And how have we as professionals changed over those years? Well, today we're going to talk about film to digital and everything in between, and I'm joined by someone who's seen a lot of changes, and that's Bruce Harvey. Bruce is a retired radiographer and clinical educator, as well as ASMIRT Fellow and previous ASMIRT President. Welcome to the show, Bruce.
Thanks, Steve. This is just great. It's the first time I've been able to be involved in the ASMIRT podcast, and it's my first opportunity to visit the new Secretariat too.
I'm also joined by Tate Brazil. Tate graduated from Deakin University in 2023 and is now in her second year as a qualified radiographer at Western Health in Melbourne, where the only change she sees is in the mood of her lead clinical educator. Welcome, Tate.
Thanks so much for having me, Steve. Said clinical educator is probably in a good mood as he's got the day off today.
Oh, I'm sure he does.
Really good. But thank you for having me.
Bruce, now you're retired now, but let's go back to when you started and where you started as well. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, I began at the Geelong Hospital as a student radiographer in the end of 1969. I had, you wouldn't call it a gap year, but I completed my matriculation in 1968, and therefore I was the only applicant who was able to quote my Year 12 results when they were looking for a student radiographer. So I started at the end of 1969 as a student radiographer and began the RMIT course at the beginning of 1970. The course was entirely by correspondence.
Okay.
Because I was at a country hospital and had to keep a detailed logbook of the procedures that I was involved in. Sometimes they didn't do those at Geelong and I had to travel to Melbourne to do the rarer ones and get them signed off.
Yep.
In those days, there was what they called the conjoint board of radiologists and radiographers who did the final, what they called certificate of competence. And it wasn't until May-ish in 1972 that I finally got my full qualification, because I had to go back and do some more stuff. My logbook wasn't complete.
So the certificate of competence basically comes about from the logbook lodgement. It's not like a test or anything like that that you have to do.
No, I'd graduated from RMIT at the end of 1971, but I still had to get that logbook completed before they'd sign me off.
So essentially you were getting paid to study because you're employed by the hospital. Was that the case, especially with your clinical placement as well?
Well, that's what it was. Clinical placement in those days was working full-time as a student radiographer. The pay wasn't all that great, but it was great to be able to work full-time while doing the course. And I had some really good, in those days, we didn't have a tutor radiographer at the Geelong Hospital, but some really good qualified radiographers as my mentors.
Yeah. And Tate, coming straight out of uni and not being paid for any clinical placement and racking up a rather big HECS debt at the same time, how does this make you feel?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm jealous. It still sounds like hard work, but it might have been nice to get something for all the hard work you do. It seems like Bruce, you would have had to be like very driven to complete the course, considering it seems very do what you can when you can and we'll just see how you go thing. I would say it was definitely hard not having the income for extended periods of time. I was pretty lucky because mum and dad were willing to help me out with all that sort of stuff over my degree, but there were definitely people in my cohort that didn't have the support of mum and dad, or paying 2 sets of rent, having to do placement away from home, and that sort of stuff was definitely hard for them. Like I said, I was pretty lucky though. I had to go interstate in my third year. When I first found out, I was like, the world was ending for me. I was like, I can't do this, but it ended up being a really awesome experience. And I would say to anyone who is looking at that as being something that's really scary to do it, because I learned a lot about myself, and as much as it was hard, it was really good to learn lots from it. So
absolutely. Bruce, with the course being completely by correspondence, how did you go about getting your theory? Because I'm pretty sure that there was no internet or chat GPT back then.
That's entirely right. The course was delivered in pre-prepared notebooks And some of the time they would say to us, read chapter so-and-so of such and such a textbook,
Right.
and then answer these questions. At other times, there were full prepared notes that we had to answer questions to. It worked well for me. When a lecturer walked into a lecture theatre and went blah, 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 and walked out again, I was way too slow to keep up with that.
Yeah.
But being able to do the course at my own pace, even if it took until 3 a.m., it really worked well for me. And I could always, when I went to work as a student radiographer, talk to my colleagues or go back and double check everything from the textbooks.
Yeah.
And we certainly weren't tempted to use AI. There wasn't such a thing.
Even I wasn't tempted to use AI. So. And what about you, Tate? What was your uni experience like?
Well, I'd say it's probably similar in a way to Bruce being a student during COVID. A lot of it was online and a lot of it was self-directed. I'd say I could work at my own pace. And like Bruce said, with finishing things at 3 a.m. if we had to, we probably had a little bit more opportunity for that because there wasn't that sense of you're at a lecture, you have to finish everything in this lab right now. We could go back and do things at our own pace, which was nice. I think I talked to you, Steve, a bit about the challenges going from high school to uni when we were discussing the podcast and how there was probably even less structure than it was expected at uni from going straight from school due to COVID. So yeah, I definitely struggled with that a little bit, but overall, I think it was a pretty cool experience.
That transition, I think, from school to university is hard enough as it is. When you add COVID into that, it must have been incredibly tough, I think. Did you do anything specific to ensure that you still came out with good skills, knowing that you had to do a lot of stuff by correspondence anyway?
Yeah, well, it was funny that you mentioned ChatGPT before. I'd say it wasn't really so mainstream when I was going through my first couple of years of uni. So we became quite a close cohort, bounced a lot of ideas off each other, and any chance we got to actually go to uni, which wasn't very often in those first couple of years, we all relied on each other a lot to bounce ideas off and really nut out the nitty-gritty of what we were learning. And yeah.
Yeah. And Bruce, can you tell us why you chose to study radiography in the first place?
I need to go back a little bit in history. My one glorious failed year at university was the result of an enigmatic chemistry teacher who had most of the boys in the class convinced that an outdoors degree was the thing to do, whether forestry or agricultural science or whatever. I was going to do medicine, but did one glorious year of agricultural science thrown in amongst a hard-drinking bunch of farmers' sons. And about all I learned was how to play the guitar. So then I saw an advertisement looking for a student radiographer, and I had to look it up in a careers book to see what it was. And I thought, that'll do me. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And what about you, Tate? What got you into radiography?
A couple of different things. I definitely like people and I like talking. So that was, naturally healthcare. You can go and talk to people all day and get paid for it. It seemed like a good gig. And I didn't want to do nursing. I have so much respect for nurses, but I knew it in myself that I couldn't do it. And I just kind of fell into radiography, was creative enough in the photography side of art and then also the healthcare side of things. So, yeah.
Great. And Bruce, when you were working as a student at Geelong Hospital in the 1970s, what was that like?
Well, I was thrown in at the deep end, that's for sure. I was within a couple of days, they'd showed me how to operate the machine. We did not have automatic exposure control in those days. Everything was off a handwritten exposure chart. It was a 2-room department. One room had a mobile divider in the middle, so you could x-ray 2 patients at once, one on the table and one in front of the chest stand. The other room was a fluoro room, but it was equipped to do angiography as well. So it was a busy department. It really was.
How's that, having 2 patients in the same room at the same time?
Just crazy.
I mean, it's crazy to think about it, even from a privacy perspective, but all the other issues that come with it at the same time.
That double room ran off a single generator, so one of the big mistakes you could make was not switch tubes.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
And you had to address whoever was your patient by name to be sure that they were the person holding their breath.
God.
But it worked fairly well.
And Geelong Hospital now has a lot more than just 2 rooms in their department. And Tate, if you can imagine running only 2 rooms in the whole department of Western Health, how would that make you feel?
Would be absolute shambles is the word that I can think of. Not so long ago, one of our emergency x-ray room at Footscray was having issues with the tubes. So they were running all the emergency x-ray patients through the general main department. We still have 3 rooms in there, but that was enough to send everyone a bit crazy for only a week. It was absolute insanity. I don't know how you would have done it, Bruce.
And Bruce, what about the image processing? You had film, obviously, so no immediate images, like we can't just take an X-ray now and see it on the screen. How did that work for you?
When I first started, we had a large darkroom and processing was done manually by hand. Films were taken out of cassettes, clipped into frames, hung in the developer with a manual clock timer for 3 minutes, then taken out of the developer, which was alkaline, and dropped into what was called a stop bath, which was acidic, then into fixer, then into a wash, then into a thing that looked like a huge clothes dryer. It took quite a long time, and the films could be quite mixed up. You had to really know whose films were whose, because in those days we used to actually handwrite the patient's identity on the corner of the cassette with a dip pen and white ink.
Oh, right.
And we eventually got an automatic processor, but it took a long time.
I still remember those automatic ones with the cassettes where you had to like slide it in under the machine and it would automatically put the patient's name on there. But I've got a question for Tate, because Bruce has talked about this. Developer and fixer, do you know what they are?
Pre-Googling.
Not
much. Fix the image onto the film paper and then develop the image. I don't know. I'm just glad we don't have to do that anymore. It sounds like so much work.
Yeah. By the time I think I had qualified, we were using film still, but they were using automatic processes. So the developer and the fixer were being done automatically anyway. But Bruce, what you've described was in a big dark room. I think I remember when I was training as well, we had all of the unexposed film kept in a hopper, and you could only have the red light on, obviously, in the dark room because it wasn't red light sensitive. And we're opening the hopper, which would have about 100 film in it in there. So I did that once. I remember I had opened the door to the room, so all of the white light had come in, and I basically fogged the hopper, as you would call it, and it actually wasted all the film. But moving on from there, the film came in different sizes though, right?
Yes, indeed. And there was a much bigger range of film sizes than we have now with CR cassettes, for example.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be talking in old-fashioned inches now. So we had what we now call a 43 by 35 that we use for chest x-rays. There was another size of cassette, which was basically one of those split in half for doing legs and so on, which we called a 17-7. There were 14 squares, there were 12 by 15s, and there was a range of different cassette types and a range of different films as well. It really was quite complex and a skill in its own right to know which one to use.
And then came the metric system, and we had to start thinking of cassettes in centimetre sizes. So, Bruce, what about other areas of imaging? I've heard stories about angiography and things like that.
Yes, we literally right from the start, as a student, I was being involved in angiography. We had what they call film changes. The crudest of all was loaded with 4 cassettes in a drawer arrangement that you would stomp on an exposure switch, pull the drawer out for the next one to pop into position. And it was almost like a dance. You'd stomp, pull, and we would do cerebral angiography like that. We had it set up so we could do a lateral by swinging the tube around, or set up so that we could do an AP of the head for cerebral angiography. And quite quickly soon after that, we got onto what's called a puck film changer. And there were many sizes of them, but puck we had was, again, head sized. It was 10 by 12, 24 by 30, I think is the metric size.
Well done.
And we also had another thing called an AOT, a cut film changer that was 14 square, 35 by 35, that was used for everything else. Chest, abdomen, and peripheral down the legs.
Okay.
For femoral angiography. It was quite an experience.
And the way that they injected the contrast was for, say, a cerebral was basically directly through the carotids, right?
We had one radiologist who preferred to do what he called direct stick carotid angiography, where he would stick a needle straight into the carotid in the side of the patient's neck. The others used to use a groin puncture and slide a catheter up. But this particular radiologist was keen on, where we had difficult patients for leg angiograms, would do what's called a translumbar aortogram, where you'd lie the patient on the stomach and slide a big needle straight in through their back into the aorta.
What?
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my goodness. That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. But the direct stick carotid ones that you're talking about, I'm pretty sure I've seen that in the Exorcist movie that came out in the 1970s as well. So moving on to CT, though, when did that come into it?
It's hard to put a year and a date on it. To start off with, the first CT in Geelong was installed in the private practice, and it began a routine. If patients urgently needed it, they'd stick them in an ambulance and take them round the corner to the private practice from the big general hospital.
Wow.
And it took a little while, but eventually the hospital administration woke up to that fact and we got a CT. It probably was in the late 1970s, I think.
Can you imagine, Tate, every patient in Sunshine Hospital having to get transported to Footscray just for a head CT scan?
Would be an absolute nightmare. I can't even imagine.
And with the CTs, Bruce, how long did a CT brain take?
Well, put the patient on the table, do the scan, probably around half an hour. But by the time we then had to film the whole examination with several lots of windows onto what's called a multi-format camera and then bag up the films ready to be presented to the radiologist, it took at least an hour to do the complete examination.
Oh, my God. And now you can get it done in just a few minutes.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, like next level.
So we've talked a little bit about the old style of imaging and how different it is now. Bruce, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts about other changes within the profession itself. How do you feel the changes of the profession are actually going?
Interesting question. I used to get quite annoyed toward the end of my career because people doing, for example, a scaphoid plane radiograph would say, oh, well, they're going to bring them back for an MRI in the next few days anyway, and not be particularly concerned about the quality of their plane radiography.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an increasing dependence, I think, from the doctors as well on going to CT and completely bypassing plane radiography. But I do strongly believe that there is a place for a general practitioner radiographer, one who practices good plane radiography.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Tate?
I totally agree with Bruce, as much as obviously I'm coming from a very different end of the spectrum on it. I'd say imaging is being used as an investigative tool a lot more now than a diagnostic tool. And I see that firsthand after hours, particularly at work. And I think half the time the patients we see haven't even been seen by a doctor yet. I'm asking them, oh, like, where's the pain? What's this? And we're then having to kind of not make those decisions for the doctor, but get that patient practitioner relationship going because the doctors haven't even seen the patient yet. And skills are definitely being lost. I agree. Radiographers are having to specialize because the technology has gotten so great and it's impossible to be good at everything now because the range is so much bigger than probably back in the day. And we're seeing advances at rates we can't even keep up with. There's new updates on the CT scanner like every second week. Like the AI involved in the scanners is so great that we probably don't even understand the full capabilities of what the machines can do. The CT scanners now can work out the exact chemical compound of a kidney stone to its exact number and how it can be treated based off that just from one dual energy scan.
Yeah.
And that's just a very tiny example of what the scanners can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like we see those advancements from CT back where we're talking about your axial CT all the way through from, helical, multi-detector, dual energy. And now we're even talking about photon counting CT on top of that. And it just advances it so much. But when you think about what you actually learn at university, particularly you, Bruce, what you would have learned in your course compared to what Tate has learned, even compared to what I learned, so much has actually been added in there. The basics have been forgotten.
Yeah, I agree.
And you talked about how a lot of the general radiography is being used as a diagnostic tool. We're actually seeing a massive influx of patients into areas like emergency department and things like that, where the doctors simply need to try to be a bit more innovative and they need to come up with different ways of doing it. So a lot of patients are just basically being seen at triage going, well, it looks like you're going to need an x-ray. So they send them through to an x-ray, only to then go back to a doctor who then says, well, you didn't actually get the right x-ray. So we're now going to repeat that x-ray with something else.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's actually being used then, as you say, as an investigative tool rather than as a diagnostic tool itself. Just moving on from that, Bruce, what about the attitudes of radiographers towards the profession?
I think most radiographers that I've encountered recently are proud of their profession. They really are. I know when I was working at Deakin, we made a point of trying to give the students as wide a range as possible of experience with small departments, big departments, private practice, public hospitals and so on, for that very reason that they would see just where they fit into the overall picture of the profession.
Yeah.
It concerns me that there are people going still to small departments that only have general radiography and they will be expected to be the experts in imaging at that place without having to automatically fall back onto CT or whatever. Did I answer your question?
No, I think you did. But I think you're right. I think as far as those rural areas are concerned, if you've got that loss of quality at a general X-ray level and you've got someone who's, say, a new graduate who needs to go out to a rural area and their first job is perhaps where they're working on their own, and I was even in a similar situation to that, then there's that quality, what's happening as far as the quality is concerned from a rural perspective, and are they actually getting the right imaging that enables that patient to get the right treatment without having to necessarily go to something like CT or to MR. And I know it doesn't happen very often at all, but what about those old, more complex procedures when they're required? So things like your barium enemas and that kind of stuff. What do you think about that, Bruce?
I think most departments, if there is any likelihood at all that a procedure like that's going to happen, need to keep very detailed instructions and be sure that there are people that can still expertly manage such a procedure. It worries me that I have seen some courses leave out some of that stuff, and yet it's still likely to happen. The classic example, as I'm sure you'd know, Steve, is the likelihood of a child turning up with an interception that needs to have that reduced, or a non-accidental injury survey.
Yeah.
I think most departments do have very detailed protocols for how that should run, but the departments need to make sure that all the staff are well informed or aware that those protocols are available.
Yeah, I think you're right, because I think that when I was working at the Children's Hospital and I would give some education to another hospital, a lot of the time they came back, one of the first things that they wanted to know was, how do we do a skeletal survey on a child? What is your protocol? What do you do? What's your setup basically like? Because it's something that they don't see very often. But when we're talking about other procedures, if we're talking about some of the older procedures, we're talking about things like your barium enemas, your interception reductions. We're talking about things like IVPs and things like that. I'm interested to know, Tate, from you, of these complex procedures, firstly, how many of them have you done, or if you've done any of them, and how comfortable do you think you'd be able to do them on your own?
It's a bit of a loaded question, Steve.
Yes.
I would start by saying that's what the protocol book is for, in terms of not having seen or done any of those things. I'm sure we pinched plenty of those pediatric ones from you, Steve. Yeah. I've assisted with a couple of NAI studies, unfortunately, but they're always very interesting to see. And there are a lot of people in the department that are always, unfortunately, want to be a part of it so they can get that experience. Look, facial bone x-rays, I would never have done any. They're always CT facial bones, and half the time that I've had staff that have had to do them, they just go and have a CT facial bones anyway, which is, I know, Bruce, not what you want to be hearing. Emergency, we do so much trauma and have to have so much modified technique, as you would know. Barium enema, I'd probably have seen a couple done in fluoro by the rad regs, but would never have remotely considered having to do it myself.
Okay. I still remember one situation, and I made this mistake where we had a patient coming in for an interception reduction. And whenever we had these, because they were relatively rare, like we don't see them terribly often, whenever it would happen, we'd have a lot of the trainee registrars and even the student radiographers would come in and sit in behind the console in the fluoro room to actually watch them happening. And I once made the mistake of saying to the parents, now there's going to be a lot of people coming into the room to have a look at this because we don't do these very often. And the parent looked at me very, very shockingly. And I was just like, oh, don't worry, we know what we're doing. It's just that they don't see them very often. We still do them often enough that they know what we're doing. But but it really actually quite shocked them. And so, Tate, where do you feel that the profession sits right now?
I'm going to sound a lot like my tutor when I agree that we're losing generals as a skill. I'd say in my own career, there seems like there's so much opportunity for everything and anything that we can imagine. The technology is just going to keep getting quicker and more complex, and we'll be able to do more and more things. So I'm trying to keep up with the demand, I guess, of what work requires, but also make sure I don't lose those skills. And I think a lot of graduates will agree with me when I say that, it's hard to not get caught up in the what's next, what else do you want to do kind of thing, and just focus on learning those foundational skills well and being good enough at them that you can do right by your patients.
But I think we can all agree, though, that the general radiography skills aren't probably as honed as they used to be, I think.
Compared to the older rads at work, absolutely not. I mean, obviously you get the years of experience as well, but just the time and energy and the basic understanding of things, so many people, we just don't even have the chance to get them, to be honest.
Absolutely. And so what's the solution to this? How do you think we can keep the integrity of the profession through these skills, Bruce?
Interestingly enough, when we were preparing this, I have had a colleague who has just retired, and she always styled herself as the general radiographer and emergency department radiographer.
Yeah.
And I think departments should recognise a level of seniority for some members of staff who are quite comfortable to stay in the general radiography area and be a lead, making sure that their younger colleagues do get regularly rostered there and have enough experience and have enough mentoring and guidance. It should be made available as specialty in general radiography. Some of my younger colleagues I've observed over the years only want to start playing with the big toys, but there are some who are quite comfortable to continue to be general radiographers, and I think that's what we need to encourage.
I'd have to agree with you there. I think, Bruce, my favourite modality is general X-ray because it is really the bread and butter of our profession, and it is quite a skilled area. It's not seen necessarily as a skilled area because there are so many other toys, as you say, to play with, but I think it is still a fairly skilled area itself. And it brings me to the next point, and that's about the future. Bruce, where do you think the future is heading in this profession?
It's already happening. We are at the point now where some of the equipment we have really does require dedicated application just to that one technology. And that's the same in medicine too. Once upon a time, doctors could do everything, but now there are specialists and general surgeons and urologists and so on. And I think that's what we're going to have to embrace, but also make sure we don't lose our foundations. We, as a profession, are being encouraged to get more deeply involved in image interpretation, but at the same time, AI is taking on some of that regardless of what we do.
Do you think then, if that's the case, AI may end up superseding that? We're in a situation at the moment where we're progressing with that image interpretation, but do you think that AI might almost leapfrog radiographers in doing the image interpretation for us?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think the AI will be capable of talking to the patient and having that link between the patient and what's appearing on the image. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a place for AI, but there's also a place for us as a profession to really deeply engage with the patient. A radiologist sitting at a desk often misses that link.
Yeah.
They get the request, the doctor talks to them, but there's often missed information in between the patient's doctor and the radiologist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what about you, Tate? What do you think the future holds for you and for the profession?
Well, already we're seeing with the MRPBA standards of see something, say something, that radiographer escalation process that we're doing at work already. That's the next step in my understanding. We're being further educated on pathology and what it can look like in different ways. Almost stepping back to what Bruce was saying about being able to identify urgent findings in a rural setting. We're still having to do that in some sense, especially in emergency, obviously, when a patient comes in and there's something very obvious that we can tell the treating team about and we're confident then to tell the treating team about.
Yeah.
So just the education on that is really big, of knowing that then you are escalating the right thing, knowing what it is you need to do in the next steps. Like Bruce said, I agree, people are going to continue to specialize. I said before, I think it's almost impossible to be fully competent in every aspect of what our job involves now. That whole concept of jack of all trades, master of none comes to mind. Further to the whole sense of AI, we should be able to let AI into our work to make our job easier, and more so to that, make our patients' experiences better and they don't have to wait as long for their imaging and etc. But having the idea of, okay, you got more time so you can see more patients. Well, no, actually, we need to then be able to spend more time with the same amount of patients because the imaging has gotten quicker.
So by easier, you mean more efficient?
Yes, more efficient is probably the better word. Yeah, exactly. So not making the scans more efficient at the expense of just shoving more patients in a day.
Now, I want to finish today's discussion with a bit of a reflection. Bruce, you're now at the other end of what I would call an incredibly dedicated career. And there's always going to be a few negative experiences, though, that do stick with us, such as that one patient that we'll never forget. I certainly have my ones that I will never forget. But you've also had some successes and people along the way that have believed in you and provided some opportunities. You've been supported through an ASMIRT fellowship. You've served on various branches and committees, most notably the board and the presidency, and you've been headhunted to assist in building a new course at Deakin University in Geelong. let's just reflect a little bit on some of those highlights and lowlights throughout your career.
Okay, I'll go back to the start as I arrived as a student radiographer. The chief radiographer, he was an elderly German gentleman who used to look over his half glasses at me and say, "Mr. Harvey, one must treat every patient as though they are your own grandmother."
Which is interesting because I still use that to other people's, although if I'm talking about pediatrics, I'm saying treat every patient as if they're your own child.
Yes, and it stuck with me forever. It's hardwired into me to treat everybody, regardless of what state they're in, with utter respect and care.
Yep.
And that was the beginnings of my profession. The next key person in my profession was a fellow called Gerald Haywood, who some of the people listening to this may well remember. He was the president of the AIR. He was the editor of our national journal, a fellow as well. And he just encouraged me to be more involved. And I know some people don't have a willingness to give that much time to their profession more than going to work every day. But it's been incredibly rewarding for me right along the way, even becoming the tutor radiographer at Geelong and supporting interns and crafting the way our department worked around them. Other side of the coin. I think what I'd like to say to young people going into the profession is that people do come into hospital and some of those people will die. And it may be that will happen when they're in your care.
Yep.
And even now, I'm feeling somewhat stressed talking about that. There are two examples that have left me with a degree of, I guess you'd call it PTSD.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about one, but the other one was an elderly lady who was thought to have osteoporosis and a collapsed vertebra in the thoracic spine. She came in with back pain. And I wheeled her away from the emergency department. She had family there with her, put her on the table, x-rayed her thoracic spine, left her lying on her side while I went to the dark room with a nurse. When I came back and said, yes, those films were good, we can go back to casualty now. And as I rolled her back onto her back to pop her on the trolley, her dissecting aortic aneurysm burst.
Oh, God.
And she literally died before my eyes.
Oh, my goodness.
And so I think in a longish career, young people are likely to have something like that happen to them, and they need to be aware that that's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Whilst we all have or will have the lowlights as well throughout our careers, they're important as well to really strengthen your professional ability and making sure that you can still, I guess, roll on. One of the hard parts I certainly have found, and I'm sure that both of you have been in this situation, is dealing with a fairly significant trauma that might come in and then having to go straight back to work afterwards without necessarily having that time to really think about what it was that's actually just happened in front of you. We're talking about human beings here, but it really brings back that value of what our profession is really about and why we get into healthcare in the first place. Now, Tate, it hasn't been a very long career yet, but it will be. What's been a highlight and a lowlight for you?
I'll start with a positive. I went to the national conference this year, and that was absolutely wonderful. It was my first national conference.
Yep.
It was just so amazing to see so many people so passionate about the job and making our work better. And I really, really had a wonderful time. I'd say probably overall, just the people, like the working relationships that you create with people and your patients is just so wonderful. And that's my favorite part of going to work, is seeing my colleagues. And, you know, when you do a really difficult examination together and have a really good outcome, it can be make or break the day kind of thing for me. In terms of lowlights, I definitely don't have anything too crazy. But the one that's stuck with me so far, we had a patient, a young man, he was probably only a couple of years older than myself, in resus. He seemed really okay. I went in there for a portable chest x-ray and he just started coding right when I got the board behind his back.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a student with me as well. And I kind of had to quickly get out of the way while I'm trying to explain to the student what was actually happening and why we had to move. And I think not only just for me to then have to get through that and then go back to work myself, he unfortunately didn't survive, but then also have to explain to the student I was with what had happened and our role. And I think the student kind of felt responsible for it a little bit too, like we didn't do our job good enough and that's why that happened. And I then had to have that discussion. So I found that almost more difficult, not just it affecting me, but also it affecting someone else. So that's the one so far that has stuck with me. I'm sure there'll be plenty more, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I ask a question here too?
Mm-hmm.
Did you and or the student, were you offered any opportunity for an assisted debrief on that situation?
Yeah, we were by a senior radiographer that was in the department that day. The patient had then gone around for a CT scan of his spine or something else. And then they kind of looked through who had been a part of the care that day and had said, hey guys, like, we know this had happened. Are you all right? Which was really nice. But I think not just my work, but I think it's come a long way with the whole debriefing on it. And I felt like I just had to come to terms with it myself. The debrief helped, but it was more just me knowing that I couldn't have done any more to help in that situation. But yeah, I definitely was Bruce, which I don't know if that was the way in your experience, but they definitely have come a long way with it.
I'd like to know whether it has become common because in these two nasty experiences I had, the radiographers on scene tended to be forgotten.
Yeah.
Doctors and nurses and so on were offered the opportunity for a scheduled debrief, and we only found out that was happening by accident.
Yeah.
And it needs to be firmly included in the way a department runs.
Yeah. Okay. We've kind of finished. We finished on a low light. Bruce, that quote that you said about from the line in John Lennon's thing.
I think it's a nice quote.
I think it's a really, really good one, and I think it's a great one to end on, to be totally honest.
I agree.
Okay, there is a line in John Lennon's Beautiful Boy, the song, that says something like, life is what happens when you've made other plans.
Yeah.
And I would never have thought that when I started my professional journey that I would retire from the profession having been president of our national organisation or taught at a university. But I just kept my head down, enjoyed my career and remained always receptive to new information and loved sharing it. And life just happened.
That's great. And Tate and Bruce, I think we'll end it there. Thank you both so much for opening up and sharing your experiences with us today. The experiences and reflections are very, very important for our professional growth, I think. And while something might seem bad or hard to deal with at the time, we do all learn from these experiences to help better serve our patients. So thanks again, both of you, for joining me today.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks so much for having us, Steve. We learned a lot.
Thanks for listening to RadPod, a podcast produced by the Australian Society of Medical Imaging and Radiation Therapy.